Okay, we're going to start to try and get to grips with the LGFS calculator. This is for calculating the LGFS fee as we go along, but also in the context of digital evidence, something that we've not been very good at claiming as we're going along, or organising the claim as we go along. And we need to be much more alert as to how to do this, and we've got the functionality now in place to enable you to do that. So in terms of what we need in place, we need the URN on the file cover in order to link the case ratio case to the DCS case. We need the offence class to be correctly added to the allegation screen, and we need the information added to the LGF calculator screen in order to correctly count the LGF fee. In some cases this will all happen automatically, but we'll quickly go through the process of adding these elements manually before we look at the automatic processes. So let's start with the really super easy part, the URN. Quite often we get this as early as the police station or even at the mags court stage, but if you need to, you can click the button which shows where it's needed. You can type or paste the URN into the field, click the tick, and you have added the URN to the case, and hopefully by the next morning, if the DCS case is also live, you will start to see the benefit of the DCS documents filing automatically on the history of the case. In terms of the allegation, there are three manual ways to update the offence class on the allegation. Firstly, if it's not correct already, you'll have this blue bar at the top of the case, and you can click here and it'll take you into the allegation screen. The second way is under the allegations on the file cover, you can click view to get into the allegation screen, and the third way is to go into the LGF calculator screen, and this button here will take you into the allegation screen. Once you're in the allegation screen, you will need to assign the offence class to the main allegation. Some of these are already pre-populated by reference to the LGFS calculators, but where they are not already allocated, it will be for one of two reasons. Either in the case of something like this, a fraud allegation, it will be because the allegation could be either F, G or K depending on the value of the offence, or because a certain class of offences come under this miscellaneous other with the H star, and in which case that will need to be reassigned to the offence class which is most relevant to this particular kind of allegation. Once the offence class is set, you can save the allegation, and that's the second part of the three things that need to go together in order to ensure that the LGFS calculator works correctly. Then the third piece of this jigsaw puzzle to make sure that the LGF calculator works correctly is within the LGF calculator screen. There are various bits of information that are required. Having already set the offence class, we need the trial type, i.e. whether it's most likely to be a guilty plea, a cracked trial or a trial. If a trial, we will need the trial length and the number of codees that we represent. With that information, with the page count that comes through directly from the DCS and with the digital evidence page count that we'll deal with later, those are the three parts of the process that we need to pull together in order to make sure that the LGFS calculator works correctly. In terms of the automation of this process, it all runs from the schedule, particularly following PTPH. When you run the Crown Court Hearing Outcome Letter, where the offence class hasn't already been allocated, it will ask you to allocate the relevant offence class. Again, this will relate to things like different fraud categories or the H star category for the miscellaneous offences. Once the offence class has been allocated, if the trial type hasn't been allocated, the next phase will ask you whether it's going to be a cracked trial, a guilty plea or a trial. When you allocate this information, say for example a trial, it will ask you the trial length. It will bring through a trial length that has already been inputted into CROn, but otherwise you'll have to take that from the time estimate, maybe from counsel's back sheet. And once you save that, it will take you into the process of running the letter in the normal way, but the LGFS data will have been captured in the LGFS screen. So just returning quickly to the issue of the trial type, obviously if there's a guilty plea at the PTPH, it's pretty easy to make the correct selection. With regards whether it's a cracked trial or a trial, you need to make the best guess. Obviously if your client has pleaded not guilty and the matter is set down for trial, you need to consider whether or not it's likely to end up cracking at some stage, either because the client pleads guilty or because the CPS ditched the trial for whatever reason, but we want the best guess as to whether the trial is going to proceed or whether it's going to crack at some stage. Okay, so let's get into the meat of trying to manage some digital PPE. We've got the Manage Digital PPE button on the file cover, and that will take you into an amended portal where we've got this schedule of digital exhibits. So working from left to right, we've got an action button to edit the record. We'll deal with that later. Delete is fairly straightforward, although you can multi-select and you'll get a delete button on the right hand side of the screen if you want to delete more than one document at a time. This is a duplicate button if you want to duplicate a row. Moving across, we've got the source of the material. We're going to have two kinds of source. One is the DCS, so documents directly from the digital case system, and the other will be external media. We're going to spend the first part of this tutorial going through the digital case system. This column is for the destination folder. Where we are dealing with DCS material, this will be blank as the DCS is the source. Where we're dealing with external media, it will be the folder from where you've got the material. The description, so in the case of DCS documents, this is the description from the digital case system itself, although we have appended the page numbers, and this last number here is the document number on the DCS, so this will be J020 within the digital case system in the sections. The exhibit reference, well, these are the page numbers. Moving across, the proof of service, again in the DCS we can expect this to be blank because the fact it's in the DCS is the proof of service itself. And we've got the number of pages. We are counting those automatically when we bring the documentation from the digital case system into your case. So as we've been through already, provided you've got the URN correctly on the file cover, we will break into the digital case system, bring the documents into case ratio, and the page count will come through automatically into this portal. And finally, we've got the justification, and we'll deal with justifying the digital evidence in a little while. So just going across the top then, we've got an Add PPE button. We'll come to that in the context of adding external media. We've got the Add or Edit justification, where we can deal with the justification in one of two ways. If we want to deal with it one document at a time, we can use the Edit Record button, and that will take us into a screen with a justification field. Or if we want to multi-select documents, we can add justification, and this will then apply the justification to more than one record. We do require a sufficient level of detail, so this is validated, so there's at least 30 characters. Yeah, but we'll see there that we've applied the justification to multiple documents. We've got an Enter Attendance Note button here. So in addition to obviously managing the digital PPE, we also have to deal with the issue of recording our time as we go. If we multi-select and enter attendance note, we will create an attendance note which will start with the considering the following documents. It will list the documents considered, and then you can add your attendance note from there. I can see us developing this further in the context of special prep. This document will schedule all of the documents in your digital evidence window, and we'll come back to that in some detail once we've provided a little bit more information. We've got the Combine History button. This is the same as we've got on the History tab of the case if you want to combine more than one document together. I suggest that this is only going to be really useful towards the end of the case when we're looking to upload digital evidence to the legal aid portal, where they want us to upload the evidence which they're going to assess in order for them to determine whether it's payable or not. And the delete button we already briefly discussed. Okay, so let's have a look at what's included in the schedule of digital exhibits based on the source DCS. Actually, let's start by having a look at what's not included. So we have not included anything from the DCS which has something with the description, say exhibit or streamline forensic report. So any of those front sheets has already been excluded from the schedule of digital exhibits. It's also been excluded from this count of the page count in the DCS. What we have included in the schedule of digital exhibits is anything with certain keywords such as call data, cell site, subscriber, and these are keywords where the LAA are currently excluding consideration of those pages from the pages that are in the DCS, and they are saying this is digital evidence, you need to separately justify why that is claimable. So out of the 238 pages, for example, on this matter, which are included in the DCS but aren't front sheets, which aren't claimable in any event, are 120 pages that have relevant keywords, so they could be claimable as PPE, but we need to justify them separately. And we've set out what they do to the fee if we manage to successfully justify them. So the starting point is that the fee relating to the 238 pages will be just under £600 in this case, and around £300 of that relates to the 120 pages of evidence which is potentially digital PPE. So if you exclude that 120 pages from the count and you only get to claim for 118 pages, we end up with a fee of less than £300. This is the fee that we could add to the basic fee, if you like, if we manage to justify the PPE. This is the amount of work we've currently done to justify the digital PPE, so 0 out of the 120. So this is what we're currently at risk of losing by not having done this work properly. However, part of the problem with the evidence that is served on the DCS, and indeed served in external media as well, is that a lot of the evidence is served in duplicate, and some of the evidence is not claimable in any event. So we need to proactively address the issue of DCS, digital PPE, and I suggest that we need to do it on the basis of sort of 3 steps. The first is we need to delete anything which is clearly a duplicate, because that's not going to get paid anyway. Secondly, we need to delete whatever is not claimable, because that's not going to get paid anyway. And thirdly, we need to go about the process of separately justifying anything that we do believe is claimable. So let's deal with the first one first. Let's deal with duplicates. So one of the easier ways to find out where you've got duplicate documents in the DCS is here we've got 2 documents relating to the call data, and they're fairly similar but not identical descriptions, but what we can see is they've got an identical page count. If we look at these documents side by side, it becomes pretty obvious pretty quickly, if you look at the pattern of the redactions, that these are duplicates of one another. So even if one of these is going to be claimable, certainly both are not. So the first thing I would do is I would look to delete one of the records and delete it on the basis that it's a duplicate. Secondly, in respect of the remaining document, we need to consider whether or not this is claimable. And this is a matter for your own judgment relating to the contents of that document. Let's assume that it is not claimable in your judgment. Then we would also look to delete this record on the basis that it is not claimable PPE. Let's take the third option then. Let's assume that this document is claimable in some form. Then we have to go through the process of justifying the basis on which it is claimable. And we also have to have a think about the number of pages that are claimable as well. And here's where I'd refer you back to the training done in Andrew Keogh's webinar and the slides, because this is a matter for your professional judgment, and in order to make that professional judgment you're going to need to understand the basis on which certain pages can be claimed. So in this case, for example, we have a document which has clearly been heavily redacted, although has pages with relevant information or potentially relevant information. So we have to make a judgment call here as to whether all 28 pages are claimable, because you have to consider all 28 pages, or whether a reduced number of pages are going to be claimable, and then we have to justify that accordingly. So let's go through that process. Let's assume here that rather than just applying the justification using the Add Edit Justification button, which is best used when you're applying it to multiple documents in any event, let's apply it through the Action button. And the default here is that we are looking at the whole page range, the 28 pages from page J86 to page J113. If we are actually claiming for fewer pages, then we need to make that adjustment in here. So we would need to adjust the page numbers to reflect only that range that we were claiming, and we would need to add the justification in the justification box relating to this particular document, and then update. So when we apply the justification, and you can see here this 3 pages is part of a total of 9 that we have added a justification to, this will update the numbers on the file cover. So here we've got our 9 pages justified of digital PPE. The total digital PPE potential has been reduced because of those reductions from the 28 to 0 and the 28 to 3, but we've still got 58 pages of digital evidence still to justify based on the documents within the digital case system. Okay, so if you can believe it, we haven't even got to the clever part yet. Let's do that now. So this is the same case. I've just cleared it by using a filter, so we just got a blank screen to make it a little bit easier to see what's going on. Let's have a look at some of the issues relating to external media. So here I'm going to add PPE. I'm going to then browse to a folder, and this could be anywhere on the device or attached to the device. So here I'm just browsing. Okay, and I've got these documents in a folder. Now I think it's important to stress that if you do have duplicate documents, so where you've got a PDF which is clearly a duplicate of an Excel spreadsheet, you're only going to be able to claim one of those documents. So we need to be clear about removing duplication where possible before you upload the files. You can multi-select the files in any folder, and then we really need the file path to be added to our schedule, and the easiest way to do that is before you click the open button to add these to the schedule. I'm just going to copy the file path, and when I click here, these documents are going to start to upload to the case. I'm going to paste the file path into my destination file path folder, and I'm going to tidy it up a little bit as well, because this first part of the folder path relates to my device, and when we come to upload the schedule at the end, we're not going to really want that there. It's not a necessary step at this stage because we can sort it out in the schedule at the end, but if you get into the habit of just tidying up the folder path, it might be a bit easier to deal with the schedule at the end. If you have, like I have done on numerous occasions, forgotten to paste or copy the file path before you click the open button, you can of course just browse using File Explorer to the same folder in any event, and then pop back to your Manage Digital PPE dialog in order to add the file path. For external PPE, we also need the proof of service, which will either be an NFE, which will have a date on it, or it will be a letter from the CPS, which will also require a date, or it could have been served at trial, for which there will need to be a separate justification, but we're not going to deal with that here. You can see we've got a bar which represents the files being uploaded to the system, and once that's happened we can add. So once we've added these to the system, we can see that in addition to our DCS documents, we've now got some external media added, and we've got the folder path, we've got the file names, and importantly we've got the page counts from the documents. Now, two of these were relatively straightforward as these were PDF documents, but this document here was a spreadsheet, and not only was it a spreadsheet, it was a spreadsheet which had multiple tabs relating to the data. And when you've uploaded this spreadsheet, this has calculated the page count of the spreadsheet, but all tabs in that spreadsheet. So having gone through this process, we have added, what's that, best part of 500 pages of PPE to the portal, as yet without any justification relating to their relevance to the case. Let's assume we've done that bit of work. We can highlight, we can edit the justification, save, and where I've multi-selected, it's applied the same justification to each row of data. And then on the file cover, we can see that we've added 492 pages to the total PPE, giving us a potential additional fee of £1,000. I hadn't yet refreshed the page relating to the justification. If I do that now, we'll see our numbers change to reflect the fact that I've justified 501 out of the 559 total potential pages of digital PPE, and we're moving the fee upwards based on the fact that we've gone through the justification process. Obviously the justification has to be accepted by the legal aid agency, so this isn't a question of just cheating our own system. We have to have a substantive justification on the file, but what we can see is the relevance of doing the work and how it impacts on the fee. As previously, I could select these three documents, click the enter attendance note, and that would give me an attendance note template based on these three documents, which I could use to record the time I'd spent dealing with them. And I'm just going to finish off the process of adding a justification to all of the remaining documents. Once everything has been justified as far as possible, we've got no further work to do in terms of building our justification in the schedule, then obviously at that stage it makes sense to prepare our schedule, which we will be amending and submitting to the LAA. This will be picked up in the billing process in any event, which we'll come to in a minute, but at any point you can click that schedule button, and if you prefer to work on Word to see the justification that you're building, you'll be able to do that in this document that's being prepared. But the final version will require us to resubmit the schedule, so re-click the schedule at the end of the case. Yes, if you're working on this Word version of the document, obviously you're not making any amendments to the data within the database itself, so if you subsequently make any amendments here, they're not going to reflect on the schedule. So I would work in the portal in terms of building up the justification until ultimately we're ready to prepare the final schedule. That obviously doesn't stop you from producing a schedule from time to time if that gives you a view that you prefer, in order to see how you're getting on with regards the process overall. So for this section, I'd like to do some quick sort of tips, tricks and cheats, I suppose, before we get on to the section regarding the billing process. So let's just have a quick reminder of the issues regarding the adding and the edit justification. There are two ways of doing this. The first way is to use the edit this record button, and this will enable you to edit an individual justification. The other way will enable you to edit multiple records at the same time. In reality though, it's not really an edit button, it's an overwrite button. So if I highlight multiple records, notwithstanding the fact that they've already got some form of justification, when I go to the add edit button, I start out with a blank field. So if you are trying to edit something, you might want to think about picking up some text in the first instance on a copy and paste basis, so when you get to the point of adding and edit the justification and you've got a blank field, you can then at least start with some initial text. The other thing I think we really need to be careful of is when we're not dealing with whole documents, when we've uploaded a document but then we're starting to make an argument or conceding the argument that only certain pages are actually allowable within that document. When we edit the record, we need to make some reasonable attempt at identifying the page numbers, so pages 1 to 10 and 31 to 48, whatever, and then obviously make a reasonable attempt to make sure your math is correct with regards how many claims, how many pages you're claiming as PPE. In this portal, obviously there's a reasonable amount of documentation. These schedules can get pretty long, but the filters are pretty effective. They work together, so you can search by multiple columns to restrict the amount of data. And if we go back to, say, our example about wanting to edit the justification, say we've got some telephone records and we're concerned about one of our co-defendants. So here I could be concerned about defendant JD, and then I could highlight all the records relating to JD and add and amend the justification. The justification is key. It's not just a question of putting some text in a document. It's going to have to resonate with the LAA in order to ensure that we do get paid. So obviously from this portal you do have direct access to the documents themselves. With a click it will take you to the document, but the documents are also contained on the history, but it's probably just worth going through a couple of changes we've made to the history with regards to this focus view. So the focus view turns on by default filters which remove the history notes. They remove internal emails, and they will also remove from the initial view the external digital PPE and the DCS documents. If you want to see those on the history, you can just remove the focus view, but then you will get a sort of pretty cluttered history involving lots of internal emails, lots of external documents that you've uploaded, and lots of DCS documents mixed in. Probably the best way then to manage that is, if you are wanting to review such matters within the history, having turned off the filter, you can then access only the external digital PPE documents by reference to the category external digital PPE, and likewise the DCS files, which are organised in the same way as they are on the digital case system, section by section. Then if you return from the history to select all, you have the whole history. If you return the history to the focus view, you've got rid of those extraneous documents from actually just working through the history and having what we would sort of consider to be the correspondence file. So assuming we've got a concluded outcome either from an upload from CROf or from entering the attendance from Counsel's fee note, in the schedule we should have the schedule item to do the closing letter along with the final hearing outcome letter. Let's run that, And when we do that, we'll be familiar with the questions that come up, including the fact that when we've done the letter itself, it will pop up with the relevant billing questions. And when we get into the billing questions, if we're ready to do so, we can go through that entire process. But because we've added the fact that there is some digital evidence on the file, we'll get this additional alert that we'll need to complete the schedule of digital evidence being claimed and the justification in support. If you're not ready to complete that, then you can click no, and it will create a new schedule item to remind you to do so in due course. If you click yes, it will take you straight through to the complete digital evidence process, which will go something like this. Again, we click, and this will open two separate documents. The first document is our final, or our near as damn it final, schedule of the digital exhibits. You can obviously make further changes to this, you can add further rows, you can do whatever you want to it. It's just a document for you to make changes to as you see fit. But ultimately, when you save and close this the last time, this is one that's going to be saved to the history of the file, and this is the one that we're going to use to justify the claim to the legal aid agency. Secondly, there's an additional document which is the overall justification for claiming the digital evidence. This will break down the total number of pages, including the pages from the DCS and the pages of digital evidence, and it will have some of the case law relating to the decisions which justify the claims for digital evidence being part of the page count. But there then is still a requirement to make sure that we set out the justification in this additional document. Previously we had to add a case summary. That now is provided directly from the case summary that we can find on the DCS, but still your justification in this part should link back to the case summary and explain overall the reasons as to why the digital evidence is being claimed as part of the page count. Now, this doesn't have to be a particularly lengthy summary, particularly if you've got a lot of detail in the schedule, but we are trying to get the LAA to pay us money here, so we need a sufficient amount of justification. If your justification in the schedule is detailed, then fine, this can be a bit more light touch. Where you've gone light touch in the schedule, then we're going to need more detail here. Overall, we just have to build the case and make sure we submit it in the strongest way possible. And that's it really. The matter will be scheduled for the billing department to do the bill. There is a reminder to send any physical discs to Manchester, although whilst that currently still refers to physical discs, the LAA are in the process of changing their procedures to allow us to transfer all of this evidence digitally. So subject to the size, we may be able to avoid the need to transfer discs from Margate to Manchester in favour of being able to move those documents on the cloud, for which contact IT team, and we'll try and sort that out. If you do need to make any additional changes to the schedule and the justification, of course they are saved to the history and they're still documents capable of being edited for the purposes of submitting our final claim. But please, let's be better at this, let's start to do this as we're going along, and let's get paid properly for the work that we're doing.